hello and welcome to our webinar on the opportunities in the aviation sector in India. The aviation sector in India has gone through a massive churn, at least in the last 2 years due to the COVID pandemic. It has seen similar disruptions like the rest of the global aviation market. However, we do believe there are plenty of opportunities ahead. The sector is in a rebound. Domestic air travel has picked up significantly. International travel is making a recovery. A large segment of the population is vaccinated and the government is driving policy to induce the sector to further growth. Not to forget that the airline sector has seen some major consolidations and takeovers in the last year or so. Reports indicate that in 2022, we can expect 52% in domestic air traffic and 60% in international traffic. So despite the pandemic, the outlook for the aviation sector remains positive, with new entrants, incoming plane deliveries, and demand once again going up. However, just like the rest of the world, the aviation sector in India is facing some challenges like security, capacity, sustainability. It is looking for ways to better optimize the ecosystem, in addition to large-scale digitization and automation. So today we will be discussing all of this with our in-house experts as well as guest speakers who will tell us the sectoral trends, what's happening, the road ahead. Now feel free to share your thoughts, questions, and our guest speakers and our experts from Business Sweden will be taking those questions. A little bit about Business Sweden itself. Business Sweden is a quasi-governmental organization, a non-profit organization with a unique mandate to help Swedish companies grow outside globally, as well as international companies invest in Sweden. We will also tell you how Business Sweden can help you in this journey. So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers. Cecilia Oskarsson, Trade Invest Commissioner for Business Sweden, Shubhang Vikas, Senior Project Manager, Business Sweden, Rahul Mishra, also Senior Project Manager, Business Sweden, Saurabh Sinha, Senior Editor, Times of India, Diksha Soni, Lead Researcher, India Infrastructure. It's over to Cecilia Oskarsson, who will be giving us the opening remarks. Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Bervi, and good afternoon to all of you joining from India, and maybe we can say good morning to you joining from Sweden. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to the Airport HPO program's first webinar on opportunities in India's aviation sector. And our aim here is, of course, to strengthen the collaboration between India and Sweden. Sweden has been in India since the beginning of 1900, and currently we have more than 220 Swedish companies operating out of India across sectors. We closely monitor the Indian economy, and it's been on our constant endeavor to support the Swedish companies' investment, but also the expansion in India, and in turn contribute to India's growth. In recent times, prior to the pandemic, we have observed that India's aviation sector has had a growth for over 14% year over year in passenger traffic, and there has been a focus to improve airport infrastructure and regional connectivity. The domestic industry was impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic over the past 2 years, as we heard Bervi talked about. Passenger demand crashed in 2020, but it's actually gradually recovering right now. And data shows that the passenger load factor has rebounded from about 50% in June, July 2020 to nearly 80% now, December 2021, for all major airlines in India. This sector is clearly recovering, and India is expected to become the world's third largest aviation market 2026. Government of India in 2021 has also accorded in principle approval for not less than 21 Greenfield Airports, and new airports are being constructed now as we speak. We are also seeing new policies and rules being notified for drones, etc. And we do expect more actions in this regard going forward. Therefore, we believe that Sweden, but also Swedish companies, can be of help in specific areas across aviation, and both the countries can collaborate more in this regards. So our team at Business Sweden has identified certain areas of opportunities for Swedish companies, and some of these are optimization of India's airspace, efficient air traffic management, digitalized airport and aviation, sustainable airport operations, and furthermore. And more of this will be highlighted later on by the team in this webinar. We know that Swedish companies have expertise in air traffic management, airport development, security and access, sustainability, integrated data management, drones, etc. And India will require capacity and capability development in these areas, and Swedish companies are well positioned here to do the same. So some of you who are here today has been successful in Sweden, but also across the globe. And now it's the time to accelerate the efforts here in India. So please come and invest here in India, and we at Business Sweden are here to help you. As Barry said, Business Sweden has helped Swedish companies grow in India for over 25 years. And we have been in the forefront, and we are, in bringing Swedish innovation to Indian market, and we're also supporting in high-tech Indian companies who actually want to seek access to the Nordic markets. We have 2 offices, New Delhi and Bangalore, and we support Swedish companies in India, but also throughout the South Asia market. We have a highly specialized team of advisors here with us today that can help you plan your market entry and also suggest suitable partners or support in incorporation or provide business or incubation services and facilitate funding for supporting your international growth plans. Aviation is priority sector for us here in India. And we are working closely with relevant stakeholders, both in India, but also in Sweden. We would be happy to discuss your Indian or maybe Swedish plans after this seminar. So please do reach out to us, both in New Delhi or in Bangalore, to book a time slot with us. Today's webinar is being organized by us at Business Sweden, but I would like to say a special thank you to Mr. Saurabh Sinha, Senior Editor of Times of India, who will be sharing his experience of observing this sector in India. The webinar is our continuing step in facilitating Swedish participation in Indian aviation ecosystem. And we are planning to release a white paper, I would say first week of March, more precisely the 3rd. And we shall share this with you in this group to drive more discussions. I am very much looking forward to an enriching and informative discussion and presentations today. Thank you for that and have a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Cecilia, for that. That was very informative. Next is Shubhang Vikas, Senior Project Manager from Business Sweden as well, who will be taking us through the objectives as well as Business Sweden's plans for aviation in India. Shubhang, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and welcome everyone. Like Cecilia quite eloquently mentioned, right? India and Sweden, they have a long history of not just diplomatic relations, but a long history of very robust and strong trade and business relationships. And quite a few of the Swedish companies and some of you who are here probably are working in India for the last couple of decades, if not more. But if we can just, rewind a bit to the last couple of years to see what are some of those milestones that have resetted or kind of boosted this particular relationship. So if you go back to April of 2018, when the Prime Ministers of India and Sweden, jointly signed something called as the Sweden-India Joint Innovation Partnership. That was in recognition of course, Sweden's own innovation streak, right, across sectors, but also recognizing that India has a lot to offer to Sweden in terms of partnerships, in terms of innovations that are coming across sectors, and how can both countries benefit from collaborating together across sectors. And in the next slide, I'll tell you a couple of sectors which were in focus, but it suffices to say that aviation definitely was one of the sectors which was identified at the very highest level. After this particular joint declaration on innovation partnership, it was followed by a visit by the King and Queen of Sweden to India in December 2019, and that also kind of accelerated quite a few of collaborations, memorandum of understandings, and something which is to highlight is the innovation center that India and Sweden built together. Now, after December 2019, with a lot of focus from the government, and aviation is such a sector, right? The governments are involved. It's a heavily regulated sector. The governments of all countries and their agencies have a huge role to play on how the sector develops. We at Business Sweden, in partnership with the embassy in New Delhi, we started exploring ways of how can we make collaboration, exchange of technologies and best practices, and to how can we create a platform to accelerate the sales, that Swedish companies will have in India and Indian companies to do the same in Sweden. And we started brainstorming on ideas and formulating some kind of a collaboration and a government-to-government framework, which we're still working on, no less thanks to the pandemic, right, which hit us in 2020, and that slowed down things quite significantly. But now with 2022, we have made a fresh start with the pandemic almost blowing over, and with Omicron's threat across the globe, coming down, including in India. This is, of course, in the first webinar series, and there'll be a couple of webinars over the next couple of months. And for folks who haven't been able to join, you'll have the recording as well. We'll release a white paper, which is the first in the series of white paper to present our perspective. It'll be a little bit of a high-level white paper, but then we hope to collaborate with some of the Swedish companies and the Indian companies to write a white paper on very specific topics, on areas, where development is absolutely required in the country, or some of the next steps, or maybe, UAV policy, and so on and so forth. We have initiated quite a few dialogues, which includes aviation as one of the agenda items. And like I said, we are always embedded and drive the government-to-government discussions, given a little bit of an expertise that we have in the subject matter area. If you go to the next slide. Now, the innovation partnership was across multiple areas, like you see here, like joint industrial R&D projects, building up of startup and incubators in India and Sweden, or how can Sweden and India leverage the startups that you have in each of your countries and open up the market for them. Innovation to kind of be inherent part of our policy dialogues, right? Advanced manufacturing and new materials is something which was very, very interesting and is discussed at multiple forums. And we all know that India and Sweden partner a lot in climate dialogues and sustainable development goals. And actually, India and Sweden are one of the founding members and are the leaders actually to jointly lead that particular agenda. But there are three areas, which were highlighted quite significantly, and it has been part of the meeting agenda of the prime ministers as well over the last 2 years. Is health and life sciences. One, space is an absolutely interesting area, and there's quite a bit of cooperation which is ongoing and will happen in the next couple of years. And smart cities, energy and transportation. And in transportation, very specifically, aviation was also identified as one of the prime areas where a lot more can be done between the countries. And the idea is not that the government will do all of that, right? It's the companies have to do it. So the idea is to kind of build up a particular environment in India, at least from the Indian government perspective, where Swedish companies feel comfortable coming in, investing, partnering up with some of the largest conglomerates, airport builders, EPC players, so on and so forth, and also kind of set up offices here to do further R&D and so on and so forth. Go to the next slide. Now coming down to some macroeconomic factors as to why is India important, or why is India attractive for foreign companies, for Swedish companies. Most of these numbers are quite well known. India will become a $5 trillion economy in due course and would actually become a $10 trillion economy in the next decade or half, right? The economy, of course, is growing. It's rebounding based on multiple numbers from multi-institutions, multi-country institutions such as IMF and World Bank. And of course, we have heard about the Gati Shakti program of the National Infrastructure Pipeline. And it's a $1.5 trillion program, but this year they've allocated $100 billion program. So, but the difference is now you see a lot of work happening on the ground, right? Either through government's own capital expenditure, or opening up of capital by banks, both international and local banks, and other financial institutions, and soft loans and soft banks, for example. But the most important aspect which is driving this growth is the growth in tier 2 and 3 cities. Whereas, from 90s to maybe early to 2010s, and even till now, the metropolitan areas of Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Chennai, Calcutta, they have led the growth, right? Most of the industrialization has happened in those metropolitan areas. But now you see the demand and emerging from tier 2, 3 cities. You have small businesses that are manufacturing things in, say, the northeastern part of the country, and if they have to sell something to the customer in Bangalore, right? They cannot afford to always send it over through rail or road, which is extremely slow sometimes because the infrastructure is still being built up. So for some of these demand, if you see the opportunity cost, sometimes air travel or air cargo becomes a bit more cheaper. At least they get to reach the market. However, with growing incomes in tier 2, 3 cities and the growing demand and the growing of local economy is where most of the growth is coming from. And over the next 15 to 20 years, this will be true for aviation as well. Going to the next slide. Yes, this is a very interesting level of data that we have, and I am sure Mr. Saurabh Sinha and Diksha from India, they will also have their own perspective as to see the airport infrastructure growing. If you look at 2016 on the left-hand side, we had only 62 airports operational. The country already had many defunct airports, over 100 to 200 airstrips, but only 62 airports were operational. And now, the end of 2021, that number has grown by 100%. You have now 130 operational airports, and no small thanks to the regional connectivity scheme or the UDAN scheme. Yes, there is a caveat where some of the airports, as part of the UDAN scheme, in some really remote corners of the country, they're not yet in operation because the airlines are unable to cover the loss of operating on loss-making sectors, from the closest economic center. But the fact of the matter is that these airports have been built, right? Either you had landing strips already and you built a terminal, or you renovated defunct terminals. In large cities such as Delhi and Mumbai, you're building the second airports. In other cities such as Bangalore, Hyderabad, new terminals are being built, Chennai, for example. So a lot of these things are happening on the ground. And even though this is the number of airports we have there in the country, but this is the trigger point for infrastructure development in aviation across the entire value chain, across the entire ecosystem, right? More number of airports would mean that more number of people are flying, and actually more number of people are flying, if you remove COVID for now. But that growth will come back. And you have more number of flights in the air, and that will require redesigning of airspaces, making airports much more efficient in terms of operations and in terms of how many customers and passengers can they handle. And all of these airports need to be at a certain level of profitability, right, for them to sustain over a long period of time. And when we talk about sustainability, we cannot keep powering these through natural sources or kind of very traditional sources. So how can you make them more sustainable and energy efficient is also part of the agenda. If you're going to the next bit of slide, Cecilia touched upon a little bit on the passenger load, but just to get some things in perspective, the passenger air traffic hit around 350 million, right, which is the highest ever approximately before COVID. And now at the end of financial year 21-22, which is end of March, we are looking at 192 million, which is so the growth is coming back. However, we have a long way to go, but India is supposed to become a billion passenger market, right, in the next decade or so. Even if it's not a billion, if we end up at 700, 800 million, that's a huge amount of people that are flying, and we don't even have the amount of cargo, right, and air freight movements within the country that can be considered as part of the growth. So to highlight and re-emphasize, so 80% passenger load back into flights, at least the flights which are in operation, and the many airports and greenfield airports are under construction. 100% is FDI is allowed, right, in the country, and currently, based on numbers that we saw, there are 20 billion worth of aviation projects, which are under various stages of development. And that's a large number, and that will only increase. And as Swedish companies, even if we kind of target maybe 5 to 6%, that's a lot of revenue for the companies to think about over the next 10 to 15 years. So it will be very difficult to ignore the market. It's a complex market, and it has become more complex because of COVID, and that's the story worldwide. But the trade-off, or rather, I would say, the benefit and the advantage at the end of the day is too huge in terms of revenue-wise for this market to be ignored. Now, going to the next slide. Now we had a little bit of information on why India, why the aviation sector, and what's happening. From a business Sweden perspective, we have been in conversations with many stakeholders, subject matter experts, airlines, airport operators, government regulators, EPC players. And when we look at this march of the country towards becoming the third largest aviation market, right? Like, what would it mean for Swedish companies, right? Where would you want to kind of participate, right? So we broke it down into 6 components that you see over here. So number 1 is an airspace which is efficient and optimized. Now, for folks who have been in the country, they know that around at least 60% of the airspace till 2 to 3 years back was controlled by the military for national security implications. That number has gone down to 50% and even more by last year or the year before. But however, I mean, that airspace needs to be optimized further, right? With an anticipated growth in number of flight movements. And very closely related to that is the efficient air traffic management system. I mean, all of us who have flown out of metros, we do understand the amount of time and the fuel it's wasted just kind of, getting a landing spot in Mumbai or Delhi or even Bangalore, right? It all boils down to kind of using the most efficient and leaner air traffic management systems, where data and digitalization kind of, drive decisions. Third is very important, AeroCity developments. This is something has been expressed by private and public airport operators, which means AAI, Adani, GMR, and others, a lot, because for an airport to be profitable or close to breaking its costs or meeting its costs, you cannot just rely on flyer revenue, right? You have to develop non-flyer revenue opportunities. So that's why you see right now you have the metropolitan cities, they have retail stores and hotels, but you will see in the next couple of years, quite a few of the tier 2 airports, such as Lucknow and Ahmedabad and Mangalore, kind of having kind of mini aero villages just to kind of become a kind of a town center for people to come in, for the ones who are not flying, to come and kind of spend their money over there, and for the ones who are flying to just reach the airport a little bit earlier, right? So AeroCity development is extremely important, and there have been many of these airport operators who have actually asked this specific question that do we have Swedish companies that have expertise in various levels that goes into AeroCity development, and I'm pretty sure we have. Fourth is digital airports and integrated data management systems. Now, airports, like we said, they have to become much more leaner. They have to become much more efficient, right? We cannot keep expanding terminals. We cannot keep adding runways to take the ever-increasing load of passengers, that is anticipated. So the 2 aspects to it is from a customer perspective, where airports will need to start, kind of providing very unique experiences, which are driven digitally, right? Thanks to COVID, most of the airports have done away with, printing of boarding passes in India. So everything is on the phone. Everyone has a smartphone. But then how much more, personalized you can make the experience for the customer? Because, flying can be a little bit stressful, but a customer would be willing to spend money in an airport, right? If the experience is unique, if the retail experience is unique, if the food and beverage experience is unique, the entire experience of, getting to the terminal and boarding an aircraft. Secondly, from an operations perspective, I think there's so many data sources and data touch points, and none of them are integrated. Now, this is again another area where many airports operators have expressed that they would like to kind of have an integrated data management system where they are able to get data from airside and land side and able to look at it together to make the airport much more much more efficient, to make sure that the passengers and customers are routed properly, and to make sure that the aircrafts are turned around in a much more faster fashion than what they happen right now. And last is energy efficient and sustainable airports. Some airports in India, such as Cochin, they're already 100%. They generate their own electricity through solar plants that they have on site. Chandigarh Airport, I think, is already green certified. And Delhi Airport, they are making use of semi-robotic, taxi bots, to battery-operated taxi bots to tow in and tow out the aircraft from the stand, and that has resulted in a lot of fuel savings. But these are very few and disparate examples of technology which has been implemented. A lot needs to be done, right, to make the airports much sustainable. Otherwise, this entire growth story will fall flat on its face. And this is where I think Sweden has the expertise, it has the technology, and also has the global experience, right? It has the global experience to actually, and the wherewithal to provide something which is off the shelf, and also kind of work together with Indian conglomerates to develop something and customize for this particular market. And we are very optimistic about this space, and we do feel that Sweden can play an extremely important and critical role over the next 15 to 20 years. And the market is out there for you to take advantage, if you will. So back to you, Bhairavi.
Well, thanks very much, Shubham, for that. That was an extensive overview of the Indian aviation market, what we can offer, where the Swedish companies can really come in, and of course the relationship trajectory between India and Sweden as well. And now for the experience in the aviation market and outlook as well, Saurabh Sinha, who is senior editor at Times of India, will be joining us. Just a brief introduction to Mr. Sinha. He's been writing for India's leading newspapers for over 2 decades now and is currently senior editor, as I said, for the Times of India. He has covered the changing landscape of the Indian aviation sector since the start of the millennium, when the country saw the advent of low-cost carriers and privately run metro airports. At the moment, his attention is focused on the big changes in the aviation sector. Mr. Sinha, it's over to you.
Hi, good day to all fellow panelists. Namaskar. Thank you for inviting me to this very important webinar. I hope it leads to the desired changes and the desired cooperation. IKEA may be the most well-known Swedish company in India, but Saab ground radars have helped us all safely take innumerable flights here for years and given us a glimpse of the country's advanced technology in the field of aviation. On a personal note, I remember doing a story just before COVID when Their Royal Highness, the King and Queen of Sweden, flew from Stockholm to Delhi on an Air India Dreamliner. My friends in the airline still fondly remember how His Highness relished the Indian dal on meal and how he insisted on carrying his handbag while alighting at the airport. My greetings to them. Now, as the global economy prepares for a reset and rebound post the pandemic, the Indian aviation space will be among the most attractive investment opportunities for sectoral Swedish companies to look at. I will not take your time with statistics that show India's growth potential, but as the fastest growing emerging economy in the world and supportive government policies to attract investments, India could become the busiest aviation market within a decade. Passenger traffic, both domestic and international, had been growing exponentially before 2020. There was a blip during COVID, now we are recovering. But during COVID, there has been a sharp increase in freighter traffic also. In the coming years, as Make in India gains further momentum, cargo flights and passenger volumes are all set to double or triple. Coming first to the airport space, a number of European airport operators are already present in India. Group ADP has a 49% stake in India's largest private airport operator by passenger volumes, that is GMR. Zurich Airport International has been developing greenfield airports in India for years and is currently working on Delhi's second airport in nearby Noida. Fraport was a part of Delhi Airport till not so long back. The number of operational airports in India is set to rise from 136 at present to 220 in the next 3 to 4 years. This will include heliports and seaports. 25 more existing airports will be privatized in this time frame. Many of the new private airport operators are first-time players in the space, and they would be open to both foreign capital and expertise. For instance, one Indian infra major recently got 7 big operational airports and is completely new to the field. There's no reason why Sudavia can't be a part of this growth story. While our companies build the hardware, brick and mortar, provide highly trained manpower at these upcoming under construction airports, Swedish companies can provide the software. Now I come to airspace management. India is in the midst of reserve defense airspace slowly opening up for commercial aircraft, allowing passenger flights to take direct shorter routes. The benefits of lower fuel burn are well known both from a cost and environmental point of view. Saab is famed for providing air traffic management solutions, and many opportunities could be waiting for it here in terms of enhancing capacity through an optimal use of limited resources like slots. Thirdly, India is making airports operational in remote areas to be served by turboprops under its regional connectivity scheme. Saab and perhaps other Swedish companies that I may not be aware of have developed remote or digital towers. These can be really useful for providing ATC services at these remote airports, which may get 1 or 2 flights a day in initial days. Now, controlling air traffic of 2 or 3 such places in one city remotely is the ideal cost solution because ATCOs and everything costs a lot of money. The State-run Airports Authority of India had even entered into an MOU with Saab before the pandemic for this, and the time may have come to take it forward to its logical conclusion. Finally, I come to the emerging drone space in India. These unmanned aerial vehicles will be used very substantively here in almost all fields like e-commerce deliveries, farming, and eventually drone taxis. India is keen to emerge as a drone manufacturing hub. Not just make in India for India, but make in India for the world. To facilitate this, India recently banned the import of foreign drones, in fact this week only. Import of drone components, however, does not require any prior approvals. With the liberalized drone rules, drone airspace map, PLI scheme, certification scheme, and single window digital sky platform in place, this is a good time to invest in the Indian drone industry. Increased commercial engagement between the countries will strengthen direct air connectivity and boost visitor numbers. The charms of Sweden, frankly, are yet to be discovered by the globe-trotting Indians. I hope Air India's popular Delhi-Stockholm non-stops resume soon and they give us more fairy tale stories to remember for all times to come. So come and be a part of this growth story. The success is airborne. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sinha, for that. And now, in fact, for some data crunching, some sector trends, priority areas and growth opportunities, we have Diksha Soni, lead researcher, India Infrastructure. Just a brief introduction of Diksha as well. Diksha is an associate director with the organization. She has about 10 years of research experience in monitoring and analyzing infrastructure policies, projects and trends. She specializes in providing sector analysis, designing and managing and delivering in-depth research, data sourcing and analysis. And also a little bit about India Infrastructure Publishing, which is a company dedicated to provide information on the infrastructure sector's key sectors in India through magazines, conferences, newsletters, research reports as well. Diksha, over to you.
Thank you for a lovely introduction, Bhairavi, and thank you to Business Sweden for this opportunity to Indian infrastructure. While a lot of ground has already been covered by the esteemed speakers before me, I am just going to quickly focus on the emerging trends which have shaped up in the airports infrastructure sector specifically. Some of the priority areas of the government and the industry, a few growth opportunities and the outlook going forward. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so these are some of the trends that we've tried to capture. We have already discussed in detail that traffic recovery is certainly in sight. While we witnessed a decline of about 70% traffic during April to December 2020, traffic started recovering in Jan 2020 and during April to December 2021, Indian airports carried about 130 million passengers, which is almost double of what we carried during the corresponding period in the previous year. Having said that, there has been a lot of rising investor and private player interest. During the initial years of airport privatization and PPP inception in the sector, GMR and GVK were the players which dominated the market. However, in the past 2 years, we have seen players like Group ADP and Adani enter the market and capture a significant market share. In line with that, capacity expansion is definitely a focus area. Despite the pandemic, the government has continued to roll out capacity expansion plans. Greenfield airports have achieved a significant headway in the past couple of years. However, it is imperative to add that they have witnessed a certain amount of delays due to the disruptions on account of the pandemic. To support the capacity expansion plans, there has been a growing investment focus. We've already talked about the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which highlights a capex of about 900 billion till 2025 to scale up passenger handling facilities. New terminal building and expansion of terminal buildings is in plan at several of AAI operated airports. Can we go to the next slide, please? Since a lot of players are showing interest in the sector, especially private players, enhancement of non-aeronautical revenue has been a key focus area. And not only the private players, but the Airports Authority of India is also deploying ways and means to tap the non-aero revenue at its airports. Some of the private airports are leveraging the Erythropolis model to enhance revenues. They're focusing on revenues in retail, advertising, vehicle parking, etc. Especially after the COVID-19 pandemic struck the Indian aviation sector, improving passenger experience has gained a lot of ground, especially in the private airports. Airports are working hard to streamline the boarding processes and maintain contactless boarding procedures. Then in the recent past, there has also been a lot of focus in ancillary infrastructure, especially cargo and MRO. So in the last few years, the Airports Authority of India created its own subsidiary called the AAI Cargo Logistics and Allied Services Company to handle almost 30% of the country's total air cargo. And the company has made rapid strides and commissioned a lot of state-of-the-art cargo facilities across the country. Then we have already talked about the regional connectivity scheme, under which around 403 routes have been operationalized and 65 unserved or underserved airports, including heliports and water aerodromes, have been commissioned under the scheme. So no frills airport is a theme that the government is trying to experiment with since a long time, and RCS has given a lot of impetus to that theme in the past. Next slide, please. So since I talked about investor interest and growing foreign investments, this is just a snapshot of how the investment landscape has evolved. What are the kind of investors that have come in the airport sector? The recent ones being Zurich Airports winning bid for the Noida International Airport with 100% ownership control. Then Group ADP's purchase of a 49% stake in GMR Airports. Fairfax has done a lot of investment to acquire a majority stake in the Bangalore airport, and the table below gives a glimpse of all the most of the foreign investments that have taken place in the airport sector in the last few years. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, the most important theme going around in the airport sector, and despite the pandemic, the government continued to give steam to its airport privatization plans, and as discussed earlier, Adani bagged 6 airports that had been put up under the first round of airport privatization. In addition to winning those 6 airports, Adani also acquired a stake in the Navi Mumbai airport and has a total of 8 airports in its airport project portfolio. Then in the second and the forthcoming rounds, the government is planning to club smaller airports with major airports. So the 6 major airports that are expected to be privatized are Bhubaneswar, Varanasi, Amritsar, Trichy, Indore, Raipur. And these will be clubbed along with 7 smaller ones like Jharsuguda, Gaya, Kushinagar, Kangra, Tirupati, and Jabalpur. So this is sort of right now the plan for the next phase of airport privatization. Next slide, please. And to sort of support these plans and leverage the experience in the first round of airport privatization, the National Monetization Pipeline has provided further traction to the government's privatization agenda and has identified a monetizable asset base of 25 airports with an indicative investment value of USD 3 billion approximately. Initially, the government had rolled out plans to privatize 13 airports by March this year. Besides, the government and the Airports Authority of India are also planning to divest their residual stakes in Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad, and Bangalore airports as part of the National Monetization Pipeline. I have also given some budget allocation numbers for the benefit of the attendees and the speakers who have joined us today. We can move to the next slide. So talking about the key priorities, privatization is, I think, the biggest theme that the government is trying to focus on in terms of attracting investments in the sector. In addition to that, the existing airports are undertaking major expansion plans, which is worth about 300 billion in the next 2 to 3 years. There are also plans to develop new greenfield airports under the PPP mode. Gati Shakti, which we talked about earlier as well in this webinar, has identified airport infrastructure as one of the 7 key pillars of its ambit, and 16 new airports have been identified to be built across 5 states as part of the Gati Shakti plan. So this is just going to provide a further impetus to capacity expansion and airport development in the years to come. Drones also we have talked about. So the government announced Drone Shakti in budget 2022 with the aim of facilitating and promoting drones as a service through startups. So production-linked incentive schemes for drones and drone components have been approved, which lead an investment value of up to rupees 50 billion. Technology adoption, I have talked about this before in my first slide, but the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the concept of physical distancing to the forefront. So in terms of enhancing the operational efficiency and better passenger facilitation, a lot of airports are deploying technology solutions to meet these growing demands in the aviation market. Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad are some examples who have deployed innovative technology solutions to ensure better passenger facilitation in the current times. Next slide, please. So talking about specific investment opportunities, the NIP collates the opportunity that is there in the airport infrastructure sector as of today, and it has a total investment value, a capital expenditure value of about 1.43 trillion, which will run up to 24-25. The ongoing round of privatization offers a lot of investment opportunity, and 6 more airports, as mentioned, have been identified. One observation and one learning from the other infrastructure sectors, but India Infrastructure Research would like to place in front of the audience today, is that InvITs have gained a lot of popularity as a means of long-term investment. So though retail participation is low, the product has significant institutional backing. So airport monetization through InvITs could be explored through attracting investments. Next slide, please. So in terms of the big ticket opportunities, the Airports Authority of India itself has embarked upon a capex plan of about USD 3 billion in the next 4 to 5 years. This will entail modernization and upgradation of AAI airports in the country. I have listed some of the airports which are being modernized and upgraded as of today. Then some key focus areas which drive opportunity to the sector are future-ready airports. Airports today are now looking to be developed on a very sustainable framework. Then to leverage non-aeronautical revenues, we are looking at Erythropolis development. RCS is expected, which is the Regional Connectivity Scheme, is expected to see greater penetration in the coming years. This will in fact support the commissioning of 100 new airports by 2025, including Greenfield Airports. A lot of airports are offering technology and equipment upgrades, and this is a big opportunity for players to look at. And last but not the least, airport privatization is an area which will continue to offer opportunities, as mentioned previously during my presentation. Next slide, please. So these are some airports which are coming up. Just to give you a glimpse of the opportunities: Navi Mumbai, Bhogapuram, Noida International Airport, which is also called the Jewar Airport, Dholera, Mopa. Next slide, please. These are some of the brownfield projects that are ongoing in the airport sector. Biggest one being Bangalore Airport expansion, followed by Delhi, Hyderabad, modernization of the Chennai Airport, and these are expected to be commissioned in the next 2 to 3 years. Next slide. So coming to my last slide, at India Infrastructure Research, we do believe that the outlook for the airport sector is quite promising. However, we need to learn from the mistakes that have happened in the past. The current airport business models do not encourage capex and cost or optimization, nor efficiency and productivity. So we need to have dialogues and discussions with the private players who have already burned their hands in the sector, and get their view on how we can course correct what went wrong in the past. A well thought out plan needs to consider airport capacity requirements, not just under 2040, but beyond. We are running a little late in terms of analyzing how and when we will run out of capacity. So we need to do that in advance. Then in terms of technology, touch-free baggage drop, minimum contact security checks, and seamless movement of passengers through DigiYatra will go a long way to ensure operational efficiency in the sector. That's it from my side. Thank you so much.
Right, Diksha, thanks very much for that. Now that we have, a large overview of the sector trends, priorities, growth areas, we've told you how the relationship between India and Sweden, the trajectory of the airport sector. How can Business Sweden really help you with this sector? Well, Shubhang Vikas and Rahul Mishra will be answering some of those questions for you.
Thank you so much, Bhairavi. Some of you may already know about Business Sweden, but just to kind of re-emphasize and re-clarify, so Business Sweden being a quasi-government agency, we are at the intersection of both business and government, right? Being backed by the Swedish government, but also being funded by Swedish companies. Our not-for-profit mandate has only one activity: to help Swedish companies grow outside Sweden, and in this case in India. And apart from being the connector to the government, we offer a full stack of management and strategy consulting expertise that kind of is that has been used by multiple Swedish companies across sectors. Quite a few Swedish companies that we are working with as of today to help them expand and sell to government and private buyers. So if we go to the next slide, what we see is that for a company, and it's across sectors and it's true for aviation as well, right? Once you come into the country and if you're going it out alone, there are quite a few customer groups and stakeholders, right? You have the airport operators, you have the builders, EPC players, then you have the government agencies such as AAI, who are again, builders, who are again operators, and DGCA, who are regulators. So it's quite a bit of landscape to navigate, and kind of can get quite confusing and sometimes quite frustrating. But with Business Sweden, we use our offices in conjunction with the embassy to provide a single interface, a one-stop shop platform to not only reach out to these different groups, but reach out to them at a particular time where their inputs or their buy-in is required, and also kind of build a India entry roadmap or an India expansion roadmap or a sales acceleration for a particular product and service in a manner so that you as a Swedish company is not left to kind of deal with multitudes of these customer groups. But we as Business Sweden do that, and we do that in a very time-bound manner, and we have kind of seen quite a good amount of results and successes for quite a few companies that we have worked across sectors. And if you go ahead and from our aviation perspective, we bucket our offerings in two major categories. One is the business to government category, where we use our the government hat, and I spoke about our role in formulating government-to-government frameworks and dialogues. So those are the frameworks and dialogues where we can insert your vision, your agenda that you may want to kind of discuss with the government buyers in the country. Secondly is drive very focused dialogue and discussions and policy advocacy, right? Because it's one thing just not to sell, but many companies are also they have some of the best practices, that have worked very well in different countries and back in Sweden that the government would like to listen over here. Agencies such as AI and DGCA, they're always willing to listen, at least some of them. And last but not the least, here, sometimes the government can be the buyer, right? And so engagement with those stakeholders, with those critical stakeholders and decision makers is something that we can facilitate, can drive, and not just be connectors, can actually kind of handhold you from your entire journey, from penetrating these kind of stakeholders or leading up to a pilot sales, so on and so forth. Business to business, again, we have an immense network across the Indian aviation ecosystems, with a network across EPC players such as L&T, airport operators such as Adani and GMR, and other builders also such as Shapoorji Pallonji, Afcons, and Tatas, right? Who more often than not are building airports in India. And here from business to business, I think many of these conglomerates are huge, right? And even though they do not behave like the government in terms of complexity, in terms of speed and agility, but they're quite massive to navigate, right? So how do you build your pitch? How do you build your plan? And then how do you kind of go ahead and drive discussions and kind of convince the stakeholders and buyers to kind of, put your design in their RFPs is something that we help. So the entire stack from, kind of penetrating stakeholders, from driving discussions, leading up to deal closures, is something that we offer. And we also supplement it with something that we call as business incubation and operation services. So for companies that are not in India, but are looking to do business in India, through a very experienced team, we can help you set up in India. You can use our offices as your base, as and when you're scaling up towards your own facilities. And if we just go ahead, Nilesh, just keep going ahead. Yeah. And just to summarize the entire offering and what as Business Sweden that we do, your account development, pitch development, partner search and closure, have an eye on tender support and advisory, doing feasibility studies to actually see whether does it make sense for you to enter the market or not, managing stakeholders across both government and businesses, building your India market into your expansion roadmap, incorporation support, and very important pilot implementation, providing you, kind of helping you kind of do the entire implementation as and when you get a particular order is something that we can help out with and would be very happy to kind of speak with you about it. Now going ahead, I think we are at the end of the session. So now the floor is open for Q&A, which I'll let Hriday and Bhairavi handle.
Right. Right. As we promised at the beginning of this webinar, that if our guests have any questions, we're open to answering those through our speakers here, both from Business Sweden as well as our guest speakers, Diksha Soni and Saurabh Sinha. Hriday.
Okay, thanks, Bhairavi. So we have some questions. So basically, we also invited questions during the registration. So we have quite a few. And also, I can see there is one question in the chat. So maybe I will start off with Shubhang. And the question is also open to Mr. Sinha and Diksha. So first is basically what would be the major hurdle for the UDAN scheme to overcome in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I can see it's a question from Ola. So no, very good question, Ola. I think the way UDAN scheme was structured was for airlines to kind of allocate a certain amount of flights towards those cities which fall under this UDAN or the regional connectivity scheme, right? By nature of the location of those cities or towns, it was not completely profitable or viable for airlines to do so. So the government came up with a scheme that, and add to it that there was a capping on the airfare, right? It could not go beyond a certain limit. I forget what that was. However, the shortfall to make sure that the airlines are at least breaking even per passenger or per seat, government came up with this viability gap funding, right? Where the government and the company, both of them will allocate some funds to do so. However, I think the viability gap funding, even though was mildly successful, it has not been completely successful because it could not help the airlines kind of, bridge the gap and kind of make sure that they can keep operating those flights, even though the government had removed, taxations and everything on viability gap funding. So I think the challenge is, whereas there is a lot of capital outlay for, building infrastructure, but putting in new infrastructure, but kind of that particular support, I guess, for airlines is missing, right? And it's not that the airlines can even kind of take cheaper loans. As it is, the airlines are extremely stretched, right? It's very difficult to earn money unless your operations are extremely low cost. And we have seen that across the board, with some airlines also shutting down due to various reasons. So I think viability gap funding and how do you make sure that those sectors remain profitable for the airlines that are operating is the major challenge for me, Ola. And I agree, remote towers are extremely useful for those very remote locations, right? Which can probably be seen and be suggested. But I don't know, Saurabh, Mr. Sinha and Diksha, I don't know if you have any pointers as well.
See, the biggest problem in this scheme is that the smaller airlines are too fragile. Just as we speak, one of the biggest players of RCS, that is TrueJet, based in Hyderabad, it just folded up just now. We just got that thing that TrueJet has stopped all flights due to a cash crunch. So the regional flights operated on the turboprops of, say, Indigo or Alliance Air. Go Air doesn't have any turboprops. SpiceJet is not in the best of financial health. So the RCS flights operated by bigger players have a certain amount of reliability. But the smaller players, we don't know how. Today, two things have happened. Today, ATF in India has reached another high. The price in Delhi is 90,000 per kiloliter. It's the fuel price in India is among the highest globally for domestic prices. So today, on Wednesday, the fuel prices have been hiked with no support for airlines, so which means smaller airlines can't survive, and TrueJet has already folded up. So as long airlines become financially viable to be able to continue to provide that service, it's going to be a problem. That's one field where, this is a huge market. That's where we need investors to come in and strengthen the arms for this small turboprop operations.
Okay. Viability,
just to clarify there from you that the government did want to push regional connectivity through low-cost carriers and then push low-cost fares, which essentially, in a sense, also stopped the more higher-end carriers and airlines to sort of get into the regional connectivity zone. Or is that not true?
See, the model per se is flawed. If you look, the two airlines that got the lion's share of all RCS routes were Air Odisha and Air Deccan. These two airlines never even flew. So the model, unless it's only these Indigos of the world which can provide a decent RCS flight, but the smaller players don't have the financial strength to continue for a very long time. So till Indian Airlines become financially viable, sustainable, any such scheme is going to remain on paper, at least till that time.
Right. Hriday, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sinha. So we have one more question in the chat, if you can see that. To support India's goal of sustainable growth, is there a focus on digitization of documents for operators in airports? Okay, so I think we touched upon it, but maybe Shubhang, you want to take it? Digitization of documents.
Yeah, no, I'm not too familiar with this. I think there's a lot of regulations that CA can work on apart from just digitization. We are working with a particular Swedish company on airside safety, and the pace of change is quite slow, right? Even though there are case studies across the globe on why of usage of a certain technology would lead to, reduction in, say, accidents and fatalities during overshoots, for example. But on digitization of documents, I'm not really aware if the DGCA is doing something, and I'm not really sure as to what is the cost overhead, right, and time overhead of kind of doing that. But I don't know, Mr. Sinha or Diksha, if you have any perspective.
Digitization is happening. Digitization of all flight records and everything, electronic flight bags and everything is happening. All the airlines are going towards EFBs because if nothing else, it helps reduce the weight on board aircraft by removing those bulky books, and you save what, an ounce of fuel or something. So digitization is happening. But as far as the digitization for operations from a green point of view, that is still evolving. That is still evolving.
Okay, I will move on to the next question. So this is more broad, maybe it's for Diksha. And what initiatives Indian government is taking to attract investments in India in aviation sector in next couple of years? You might have already touched upon it. Maybe you can just briefly answer this question.
I think one is the FDI limit that has been raised. So that is the biggest driving factor. And the government is offering a lot of incentives also, and there are a lot of dialogues that are happening with foreign investors to participate in Indian projects and the Indian airport privatization journey. But the biggest driving factor, I think, will be FDI limits, which have been relaxed to a great extent.
Okay. The next question is, okay, this is for Business Sweden. Has Business Sweden worked with some Swedish companies in this framework?
Yes. Thanks, Uday. I mean, I think we definitely have, right? In the sense there are multiple examples, and maybe for the person who's questioning, I think we can have a one-to-one chat. But we have worked with clients who are targeting or kind of, ready to engage with both government buyers and private buyers. So we were able to, facilitate and penetrate those stakeholders and decision makers at both ends. There are multiple examples of companies across sectors in aviation that we can talk about.
Okay, maybe because this came through registration, so maybe we can reach out to them separately and highlight.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we have one more question which we have already covered is what is the change in the Indian airport infrastructure over the last decade? So this I think we have already touched upon with that during the presentation. So yeah, I think these are some of the questions. Anything else from the participants? I think we are towards the end of the webinar. Okay. Maybe Shubhang, you can maybe close the webinar then.
Sure. So thank you so much, Bhairavi and Hriday, for running this, and thank you so much every participant for your questions during the registration. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for doing a good introduction into collaboration between India and Sweden and how the journey has manifested itself. Thank you so much, Mr. Sinha, for your wide breadth and even depth of knowledge in the sector that you see. And thank you so much, Diksha, for bringing to life some statistics that you presented across number of airports, investments, and capacity enhancements that we need. For every participant, feel free to reach out to the email IDs that were there during the Q&A, and we can share that again. If there are other specific questions for our external colleagues, Mr. Sinha and Mr. Dikshanath, do let us know, and we can connect you to them as well over an email. But as a very next step, we'll be sharing this video recording and this material with you over an email to registered participants. To reiterate, we'll be coming up with the white paper that we'll release on 3rd of March, right? And that will also be something that we'll be happy to share with you. But feel free to reach out to us, and you will see us reaching out to you also directly for some opportunities that we see will work for some of your companies in India. So thank you so much for your time today, and have a great rest of the day and the